Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos and welcome to This Week in Mythic Plus for the week starting December 10th in North America and December 11th over in the EU servers. This week's affixes are Fortified, Teeming, Quaking, and the beguiling pattern is Tides Heavy. All in all, this is a pretty rough week for doing keys, especially high-level keys. Quaking is going to be fixed soon. It's getting a change in patch 8.3 where it'll no longer do as much damage if you actually spread correctly. But as of right now, that change isn't in the game yet. Hopefully they hotfix it in, but it doesn't look like they're going to, so we're going to have to deal with Quaking being the biggest source of damage in keys still. If you look at like overall damage taken at the end of the run, it's always Quaking whenever that's active. And then Teeming and Fortified are a combination of affixes that multiply together to really slow down the overall dungeon. You have to pull bigger and more. You have to pull more packs throughout the dungeon. The packs are bigger, and they're lethal enough that you can't really double pull all that often in many dungeons. And so all in all, you just have very little time to go through a dungeon. The Tides pattern also is problematic because it's often really tough to do any kind of double pull that involves the Tides. So unless you have things like Ring of Peace to knock a Tides out of a pack and then pull the rest of the pack without it, it can be really, really tough to get more than a couple percent per pull. Okay, let's start going dungeon by dungeon. As always, we start with Atal'Dazar, and the routes that you'll see on screen are my expert routes from the Radar.io weekly route series that I make. You can find these and basic versions of the routes that have fewer skips and stuff, all at Radar.io every week, where I make a little article and explain these sorts of things in them also. This week, Atal'Dazar, there are a couple of bad things and a couple of good things. Teeming Atal'Dazar, there's some really stupid stuff going on in this dungeon where there's random teeming packs. So this pack up here may or may not spawn on teeming. And then down here, you may or may not get this pack. And you may or may not get these two extra mobs here. They may or like sometimes they spawn and sometimes they don't. So what that means is that you like in a higher level setting, you may have specific routes that you plan for based on which packs spawn. My route here works the same either way, and so does the basic route. But it's an annoying thing that you sometimes have to deal with, and sometimes this is going to be in the way, and you'll have to like shroud earlier or find a way to walk around it more easily, and that is pretty obnoxious. That's an RNG component of the dungeon on Teeming Week. As far as the other affixes go, Fortified, pretty good. We're pretty happy about Fortified in here. Quaking can be a little rough, especially if that comes at a bad overlap during the Sordid pulls, that can be really problematic. Other big teeming problems, like this pull gets really rough here. The one after Volcall on the stairs, I really recommend having Bloodlust for this week, especially if you're going to fight it with the Tides in the pull. Chain rooting or whatever this Tides out of the pack is really a nice thing to do, but one problem with that strat is it means that you probably have to fight both of these Witch Doctors at the same time. Instead of like CCing one and focusing the other down and then switching to the other one because you're already, CCing a Tides out of the pack. So all in all, this is a really challenging part of the dungeon. And you need a lot of extra count this week, just in general. You're going to have to pull, stuff from the left and the right, or you might have to pull the middle pack, depending on how you want to get your trash. Just because of Atal'Dazar and Teeming, you end up needing to pull a lot more stuff. And we have this fun void here that you can't really skip. You could try pulling like this pull onto it, these things. Although I actually wouldn't recommend fighting Juggernaut and Augur at the same time as a void. You can definitely pull these two priestesses onto it. That's something you can do if you want. But all in all, tough week, tough dungeon. Not the worst of them, but a couple of annoying things going on in here for sure. Freehold this week, Fortified Freehold, usually a great fortified dungeon. This week, Eudora is an enemy captain. You're gonna have to fight her and Captain Jolly. So this boss is still going to be rough. Still probably a good idea to get Bloodlust for. Especially like Quaking can kind of one-hit combo you here. Quaking also annoying on the first boss, on the third boss, and actually it's really annoying on Harlan Suite. If you're fighting Harlan Suite like in the little corner here, Quaking can be a really big problem. So you got to be really careful of that. That can you can't even really pull this pack either because there's a Tides in here. So there's not really a good answer to this except for just try and play well around the Quaking and conserve the space that you have when you don't have a Quake going on. Outside of that, the crew that we're joining this week is the Blacktooth Brawlers, which means that you'll still have to fight Cutwater Harpooners. Fortified Cutwater Harpooners in these big teeming pulls can be kind of obnoxious, although there really aren't many added teeming enemies to any of these things. The only added teeming enemies we get are like this extra Crusher here, which generally doesn't get pulled anyways. Outside of that, the extra teeming enemies kind of not too bad in Freehold this week. There's like one random bone saw here. The main effect is that you just have to pull more trash than usual, but this is a good week for that anyways, because we get all these random extra trash mobs that you have to kill to join the RP group anyways, so not an awful week for Freehold in terms of difficulty, I'd say. Quaking being the operative affix, especially on like the last boss. And remember that Eudora is an enemy captain. One final note in Freehold this week, I'd recommend pulling all 10 of these mobs and bloodlusting at the start if you can handle it. That's a really good way to get on the board quick with 13.4% in one pull. And it's a good way to get your lust on cooldown immediately, and it's a good way to get value from like a pre-metamorphosis or pre-incarn before the dungeon starts. Like what you want to do is you want to hit meta and then you start the key. And that way you'll get to carry it into this pull. And you can do the same with like Incarn and a couple other abilities like that. Okay, on to King's Rest. The emissary pattern in here isn't too bad this week. There's one annoying void here, but it's not too bad. And then this void later in the dungeon, you can just skip. You can walk right by this thing and it's fine. Just go into the last boss room and it'll keep casting and the gate will go up and it'll not be a problem at all. So I'd recommend doing that for sure. But teaming in here really does suck. We get an extra Witch Doctor in this room, so you have to add an extra pull to this room instead of double pulling these two packs together. We get an extra Purification Construct here that is basically impossible to skip, and that makes that muddies this whole room up, and it's kind of slows this whole place down. And then you just have to pull a bunch of trash in this whole dungeon. You can't like skip this thing as easily, and you know, even if you end up doing all of the robots in this stupid place, you can only skip a couple of pieces of trash on the bridge. If you do want to find a way to skip Shadow Zool using like a double jump over this gate or whatever that we discovered, you can check out my video actually on how to skip Shadow Zool to learn the little exploit thing that people have come up with to not fight this mob. But if you choose to try and find a way to do that, you'd have to add even more of like one of these awful trash pulls to make it work. So all in all, it's really rough because you just have to pull so much trash in this dungeon. Quaking is also pretty annoying in here. There's a lot of spots where, you know, there's high damage on somebody, so an extra hit of 20% damage on them is bad, and the healer needs to be bombing GCDs into that person to keep them alive, and they can't do that, obviously, when Quaking goes off, so, like, Kula the Butcher, Spit Gold from the Golden Serpent, both of those can be pretty lethal this week, and Quaking can suck on King Dazar also, especially if it overlaps with the Fear on the second Raptor. So all in all, like, you don't get any of the benefits of Fortified normally because Quaking is active, and the bosses are still really lethal, and you also have to deal with all this fortified teaming trash. So King's Rest, really rough this week. Shrine of the Storm is another dungeon where on teaming, you basically have to pull a bunch of stuff that you don't normally pull. So basically, in Shrine of the Storm, people make a decision each week between, like, do I want to pull Windspeaker Heldis? Do I want to pull Runecarver Sorn? Do I want to pull this Guardian Elemental? Do I want to pull, like, trash in this area? Do I want to pull trash on the bridge? All those questions. Normally you have to pick like one or maybe two of those areas to pull mobs from. And on Teaming Week, you basically have to pull all of it. Like my expert route here, I want to skip Heldis, Sorn, and the Guardian Elemental. But that adds like all of this trash here, which is normally we don't pull this. And it's really hard to pull. And I don't even know if this is the best way to do it. Like maybe you're supposed to pull these mini bosses, but mini bosses also suck on Fortified. And I'm still pulling the bridge and pulling like a lot of trash here at the front. There's not all that much more trash you could add here at the front. Basically, you end up needing to pull like the entire dungeon to get mob count, and that really sucks because the worst, like the stuff that we skip normally is really annoying. So that is the worst part of this dungeon this week. Seige of Boralus, again, similar dungeon in that you have to pull more trash than usual, more trash pulls than you would expect. You're gonna have to pull enemies from this like bilge rat area, even if you pull all the trash before it. So that can be something you're not used to. There's this annoying Ashvane Commander patrol, although you can actually skip this if you can even just walk around it if you get it at the right spot in its patrol, but that can be annoying then because it'll be there if you release here and you have to run back, and that can slow you down if two people die normally and they can get back to the pool quickly, but this patrol is still in the way, that can be a problem. So if you've got extra time, I would recommend just killing them off to remove that problem. And we have this annoying void here, stopping a shroud that would normally be done this way, so it has to turn into a death skip. There are some clever ways that you can get past voids without everybody getting in combat, but those are pretty hard to execute, so usually this is going to cost a battle res or a shadow meld or a banish or something to get through this place without actually expending or without actually killing everything, which is obviously a really bad option as well. Temple of Sethraliss, not an awful dungeon this week. There are a couple of rough teaming pulls. Really, if your group can survive this 5 static charge dervish pull, you're in good shape. This is the hardest part of the dungeon on Teeming Fortified. If you can get through this pull, the rest of the dungeon, not too bad. Quaking is pretty rough on Galv, even on Fortified, so that can be really obnoxious. And outside of that, it's all pretty much the same. You just run down a straight line. You're gonna have to pull a little bit extra than usual. It's also worth noting that if your route includes these Shrouded Fangs, or these Shrouded Fangs, or this Shrouded Fang, and you're trying to get count from these Crowlusk hatchlings also, they sometimes are weird and sometimes they won't actually follow around the Shrouded Fang. So if you want to get count from them, you need to make sure that you're actually killing them because they will despawn when the Shrouded Fang dies. So if you haven't yet killed them, you're not going to get count from them. And that can be like if you've got a route that gets to exactly 100%, you don't want to end up in this spot where you realize you missed one of them after you're in here and you've already gotten like all the count and you have to backtrack like all the way to here to kill this Tides or whatever to get the last bit of count. Motherlode, another dungeon that's pretty rough this week, in that you having to pull extra trash with so much bad trash in this dungeon is a big challenge. You're going to have to make some tough choices. Other options besides the things that I have marked in this route, like you can pull a bunch of trash from this area. That's a fine thing to do. Skipping these extractors, for instance, is something you may want to do. You can get like these 2 sappers. That's a good thing to pull. I wouldn't recommend pulling anything in this R&D department, but you could pull a little bit further into the VMZ. You get these war machines maybe also, and this pack of war machines also. So those are all good options as well. If you're looking to skip something like these extractor pulls, that is a fine thing to do as well. But it's going to be a hard dungeon pretty much regardless. Like Fortified is already rough in here, and a combo of like Quaking overlapping with Addled Thugs charging you, or Mech Jockeys grease gunning you, or getting like Earth Shocked or Throw Rocked from these guys. Those are all pretty lethal one-hit combos. So I don't know. This is gonna be a really hard dungeon this week. You're gonna like wipe to things and not really understand why, and it's just because that Quaking damage output and the fact that it stops your healer combined with all the like one-shotty abilities in here is just really lethal. On the whole, the Underrot isn't too bad this week. Teeming adds a couple extra enemies in here, but this room is so wide open that it's not too bad. The big problem pull is this one, Tides, Defiler, Deathspeaker. You're going to need to find a way to keep this Tides, and ideally the Deathspeaker also out of the pack while you kill the 2 Defilers. And then you can pull the Tides and even the Deathspeaker into the boss here. If you don't have, like, Entangling Roots, Polymorph, Ring of Peace, something like that to keep Tides out in a permanent way, you're going to run into real trouble here. You're going to need somebody to, like, off-tank this, or you need to set up a complicated CC rotation where, like, people call what they're about to cast on the Tides. In my experience, those have a really high chance of failure, and this pack will absolutely kill you. If the Tides is next to these Defilers, it's over. These things are going to kill you. Like, the combo of Withering Curse and then a Shadow Bolt Volley is actually just going to wipe a group on pretty much any key level. So this is really, really, really tough, and you need to, if anything, this is the pack you need to have a plan for. Everything else in the dungeon is much more flexible. Also worth noting that Quaking during Kragmaw's Tantrum can be really rough. I'd recommend getting a Weak Aura that tells you when quakes might happen. They're on a 20-second timer, and then every 20 seconds they either may or may not happen. There's a chance. So you want to make sure that if there's a possibility of Tantrum overlapping with a Quake, that you save extra defensives or your healer prepares extra hard for that Tantrum versus ones that don't line up with that overlap. Tol Dagor is a really rough Quaking dungeon because of how tightly packed the hallways are. It's really hard to spread for Quaking, especially this week, the Tides week. There's actually a bunch of annoying voids that you're going to have to pull. There's this void here and this void here that are pretty much unavoidable. So trying to like stack the whole group up into this little spot here to avoid the void explosion when a Quake is also coming out is really bad. That can easily end your group. So my advice for this week is to line the voids early. Try to avoid getting any stacks of the Queen's Decree hide, because you don't want to get in this position where you are forced to hide because you're going to die to the next void hit, and there's a Quake coming out at the same time. So you should instead try to just keep lining them early, and then if there's a bad overlap, that's when you can avoid that's when you can stay out of the group and actually take another hit from the void without it being lethal. Another thing to make sure to do in this place is make sure you're spread before Jess Howless phases at 70%. Otherwise, you might be all stacked up when a Quake comes out, and that while you're stunned, you can see how that would be bad. Finally, Waycrest Manor. Waycrest Manor, not too bad on Teeming Tides. On Teeming Void Week, it was actually a lot worse. There were some really annoying voids next to hard Teeming pulls. But on Teeming Tides, it's actually not so bad at all. Depending on which door you have open, especially the top left door, it's a pretty good week for this place. There aren't really any like awful Teeming additions to the dungeon. You're just going to have to pull a little bit more trash than you normally would. But you know, you can do that pretty safely. Again, like stuff like these pulls in the cellar, you could avoid doing this one if you don't want to fight a void. You could just fight like Matron Alma and something instead. But there are options this week in Waycrest. There aren't really any pulls that become unmanageable. Tides in this pull is a little rough. Again, keeping that out of the pack for a while is going to be a good plan, or focusing it down. You can usually tank a couple of soul volleys from this thing, but you got to be careful. You probably need cooldowns going into this. Thanks everybody for watching. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode of This Week in Mythic Plus. If you enjoyed, remember to like and subscribe and everything, and check out my Twitch, twitch.tv/Dratnos. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.